Hi, this is Kevin at the Virtual Planetarium at Raritan Valley Community College, and I really need to stop wearing green. But welcome to our weekly Star Talk. Today we're going to be talking about springtime constellations. But before we do that, let's talk about our upcoming moon phases. We have a new moon on April 1st, we have a first quarter moon on April 9th, and then we have the next full moon on April 16th. Alright, like I said, today we're going to be talking about springtime constellations. Like we said last week, March 20th, last Sunday, marked the first day of spring, so we are now officially in the spring season, which means hopefully it'll start getting warmer and warmer for us here. But with a new season, we get new constellations. We won't suddenly get the springtime constellations. As we see in our nighttime sky right now, we have the sky set up for about 8:30. We can still see some wintertime constellations. We have Orion right here over on the right, and then we have Sirius right here, the brightest star in the night sky, is a wintertime star. But they're still up in the sky during the spring. But if you do notice, they are actually very close to the horizon. So as spring comes along, as later spring comes along, these stars and constellations are going to be lower and lower in the horizon and eventually be setting by the time summertime comes around. So they're called wintertime constellations because they're higher up during the winter, but it doesn't mean they disappear as soon as the spring comes along. Now the first springtime constellation we're going to look at is towards the southeast. So I'm going to put the southeast in front of us right here. And right above our mouse right here, right above the southeast, we have a little backwards question mark of stars right here. Let's zoom into these a little bit more. And we have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stars, with this bottom one being the brightest. And this is the mane of Leo the Lion. Again, the easiest part to find is this little backwards question mark here, or a little hook, whatever you want to call it. And that is the mane of Leo the Lion. And then the rest of the constellation, it's just this little triangle back here in the back. So this kind of does look like a lion, lying down, sorry. But if you need a little bit of help with your imagination, here we have Leo. He's not lying down now, which is a little sad. But we see again that this little backwards question mark or hook is the mane of the lion. And then that backwards little triangle there is the tail, or the back end of the lion. Now, Leo is pretty easy to find on its own, but if you're ever confused and don't really know what direction you're looking at, you can also use the Big Dipper to find where Leo is in the sky. So we actually see that we have the Big Dipper right above it over here. These 7 stars right here are the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper right now is just above the northeast, so if we see northeast down here, we have the Big Dipper right on top there. And we call this the Big Dipper because it kind of looks like a pot where you fill it up with water and you put it on the stove, boil it, make some pasta. We have the handle right here is these 3 stars, and then this base right here is where we put in the water. So the way to find Leo is to actually follow that example, that use your imagination, and fill this up with water. And then if we poke a hole in the bottom of the pot or the ladle, it'll drip, 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 drip onto the back of Leo the Lion. So if you don't really know if the little backwards question mark or hook that you're seeing of stars is Leo, if you can find the Big Dipper right on top of it and use that technique and drip onto the back of Leo, that might help you identify it a little bit easier. But again, that little hook right there is actually pretty bright and pretty easy to spot, so you could use that on its own if you can find it in the sky. Now, just in front of Leo, we have another springtime constellation, but it's actually a pretty hard one to find. This is the constellation of Cancer. The constellation itself isn't that big. It's just these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 stars. It's making this little bow tie shape in the sky. And the stars really aren't that bright, so it's not really an easy constellation to find. So why am I pointing it out? Well, I'm pointing it out because right in the middle of Cancer right here, there is actually a really cool binocular target. There's something called the Beehive Cluster. If I search for it right here, Beehive Cluster, it's right here. And when you zoom into it, we can see that it's a little open cluster of stars. I've never really understood why they call it the Beehive. I don't know, that doesn't really look like a bee to me. Maybe it's a single bee right here, but it's definitely not a hive, so I don't get it. But it is still a pretty cute little cluster to find with just a small pair of binoculars. Again, if you have any bird watching binoculars or something small like that, you can use those to find this in the sky. And while Cancer is pretty hard to find, these stars are the easiest ones to find, but the rest of it up top here is actually really hard to find. You can use Leo right here And once you find the whole constellation of Leo, so you can find the mane of the lion right here, and then this back triangle over here, if you were to just follow this line in a general direction, then you'd be able to find where the beehive cluster is. So you don't have to be able to find the whole constellation of Cancer, but you can just point your binoculars in this general direction, and odds are you will be able to find that cute little cluster right there. Now the third group of stars we're going to talk about is actually the Big Dipper. So we have the Big Dipper, like I said, right above Leo over here. The Big Dipper is again towards the northeastern part of the sky. And like we mentioned in a previous video, I'll link that in the description of this video, it is called the Circumpolar group of stars because it never sets below the horizon. But during the spring and the summer, it's actually highest up in the sky, so that's really the best time to try to find the Big Dipper. Right now, again, it's towards the northeast, but it's pretty high above the horizon, so it's easy to find. And we have these 7 stars that we just pointed out before, the Big Dipper. Now, the Big Dipper, again, isn't a constellation. We talked about it in our Circumpolar video as well, but it is what is known as an asterism. It's probably one of the most famous asterisms, but it does belong to the much bigger constellation of Ursa Major. Now we can tell that the Big Dipper is really just the butt and the tail of this big bear in the sky. But the stars of the Big Dipper are a lot brighter, much brighter than the rest of the constellation of the Big Bear, so that's why it's so much more famous, and that's why it's a lot easier to find in the sky. Now you can actually use the Big Dipper to find a few other things in the sky. The first thing we're going to find is the star called Polaris, which some of you might not have heard of, but you definitely recognize it by the name of the North Star. And the way we can find the North Star is by using these bottom 2 stars right here of the Big Dipper. Sorry, these last 2 stars. These are called the pointer stars, and if you were to draw a line straight through these stars, we come to this unimpressively bright dot over here. And this right here is the North Star. Stellarium gave it away. The North Star also belongs to the Little Dipper. So if you can find the Big Dipper in the sky, you can find the Little Dipper. And then we can actually use the Big Dipper again to find and identify a third constellation and important star, or in this case, just a bright star. And what we're gonna use this time is the handle of the Big Dipper right here, and you notice how it has a little arc right there? And we're actually going to use that word, and what we're going to do is we're going to arc to this bright star down here called Arcturus. And Arcturus is, I believe, the 4th brightest star in the night sky, so it's definitely easy to spot. It's not as bright as Sirius, but it's still really easy to see. Now, right now, it's still fairly close to the horizon, so we'll come back to Arcturus and the whole constellation it's in later, in a few weeks probably. But I just want to point it out, if you see a very bright dot towards the eastern horizon, you can use the arc or the handle of the Big Dipper to help identify this bright star in the sky. So that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you learned something new. Again, the Big Dipper is very easy to find this time of the year, so just look towards the northeast and you'll be able to spot those 7 stars, and use that to find either Leo or the North Star or even Arcturus as it's rising. If you like this video, be sure to give us a like, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel. We'll be putting out a new video every week. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope you have a great week.